Hi everybody. Firstly, look, I'd really like to send my apologies for not being able to make it to NOAH this year. I'm really disappointed. Unfortunately, I've had a small accident which has meant that I've been unable to travel. But I really hope that it's going well. There's a fantastic group of people there making lots of really interesting connections. So hopefully I'll see you all in 2023. And if not, I'll hopefully speak to you in the meantime. But look, today I'd like to stop and talk about FLINTpro, our software product for solving a number of issues around carbon accounting and natural capital accounting. And in particular, listing some of the challenges and some of the reasons why we've built FLINTpro the way we have. Very first problem that we see is the challenge of trying to measure nature. So invariably nature is extraordinarily complex, and that means that the systems required to actually describe what's going on, especially when we have interactions with nature, is actually complicated as well. There's lots of different processes, lots of different data, lots of different things happening in this space. And so the challenge is, how do we actually start to represent nature in a way that allows us to say, well, here's what the impact of our past management was, and here's what we can do in the future to improve that. I think that one of the key parts, though, is to go back and look at what the drivers and the needs are and how much these have really changed, especially over the last 2 to 3 years. It's a really massive shift in the mindsets of corporates, governments, NGOs, basically the entire space working here. So what we've seen is a really large sudden push of needs for new reporting. These are coming out of things like the science-based targets, the task force on climate-related financial disclosures, nature-related risk disclosures, CDP, all of these things. What they've started to do is they've pushed everyone towards realizing that they're going to start to need more data on the impacts on land. We can divide those into two key areas. Firstly is more of the technical problems, the reporting needs. So how do we have data that can meet these standards and guidelines? How do we make sure that the systems we're using can move from the smallest field or paddock all the way through to a portfolio, through to a government, through to a national system, even internationally, in a consistent way that everyone can trust and use? How do we do our scenario analyses, for example? So how can we ask the what ifs? What would we want to change to improve things in the future? Benchmarking and footprinting, how do we compare to others in those spaces? Are we doing better or worse? And how can we actually change our practices so everyone is improving? And how do we determine the uncertainty and the accuracy of these products so that we can actually judge how much impact we're actually having? So they're all the common ones. You'll hear those a lot over the next few days, and I'm sure you've all heard of those a bit over the past little while. But the big challenge that we're also seeing, driven by corporates in particular, is the operational needs. So we're starting to look at what's the actual cost of operation? What's the actual data management process? How do we keep this data flowing? How can we have confidence that the past data is being stored accurately and that the future data will be updated in an appropriate time? How do we get access to these results rapidly? How do we not, for example, just have to pay consulting firms large amounts of money to produce a report after months when you could actually get it online? And how do you get access to those results quickly? No different to the way you'd last to see financial reports once a month, for example. How do you deal with auditing, verification, reliable QA/QC, and how do you do all of your version control and updating? They're really big challenges. Now, they've been addressed in multiple other areas. I mentioned the financial sector before. That's a very obvious one. And there are other regulations that have had to deal with this. But this is quite new for a number of organisations. So what I think we're really starting to see is that this is really driving it's driving a shift from what we've traditionally used, which are tools. So Excel sheets or scripts written in a GIS system or something simple that's been good enough for an annual report, to the actual need for systems, a systematic approach for estimating the metrics required for both carbon accounting but broader natural capital accounting as well. Without harping on too much about it, I guess we're extremely lucky in that we've got a team that's able to meet this challenge. So I'm not going to read through all of the criteria here and really go through the experience of the team, other than to note that most of the team that you see here have worked for well over 20 years in the land sector space, and not just in the technical solutions, very much in the market and policy. So really coming at this problem from a what is actually going to be needed and how do we design systems that can actually meet those needs, rather than trying to come at it from a data-driven solution. And what that allows us to do is really design a system FLINTpro to actually meet all of those needs and then start looking for the data to feed it. Now, why do we do that? Because for 20 years we've been looking at this, and there's been one common thread through all of it, from the carbon world to biodiversity to water to all of these metrics. And that is, there is no silver bullet. There is no one technology that is able to do all of these things. What we need to do is integrate them. Because if you have all of these streams of data and you put them together coherently, you can actually meet a lot of these needs. So there's a lot of great data coming out of remote sensing, for example. That is going to be a key thing going forward. Models can produce a lot of data, GIS can produce a lot of data, and there's a whole lot of other aspects too, but I've just tried to keep it simple here. But the message here is that integration is going to be key. Integration alone can't work, you still need the data, so this becomes a collaborative process. And this is what we did when we designed and built FLINTpro. The idea was to solve the integration problem. We recognised that there were so many good groups out there working in the data space, and many of them are at the conference, and I wish I could have seen them today. They are friends at Space Intelligence and TerraPulse and other groups that would have been able to really sort of talk about how this works. But what you can see here, without going into the details, is we have a big data input system that comes from the outside. That's remote sensing products, that's climate, that's soils, that's emissions factors, that's models. There's a whole lot of information coming into the system. The FLINTpro system inside the grey box is where the magic happens. This is where we integrate all of that data to be able to produce the outputs both in database formats and maps through time, fully spatially consistent, into a very large system that can then be simplified to allow people to use the data through business intelligence tools, maps, or other types of systems. That's enough about the how. The key question is, how do you get it to the clients? And so we've developed the customer-driven solution with 3 arms for this system. The first one is a system subscription. So this particularly focuses on large corporates, organisations and governments that have the expertise and want to run their own systems for reporting, for scenario analysis, for planning. So you can simply get a FLINTpro subscription, you immediately log in, you can start loading up your areas of interest and using either default data or data from other groups like third parties that I've mentioned before. You can start producing very timely, accurate and useful information from the system yourself without the need to go off to consultants. There's the data and analytics system where we can produce very large data outputs that people can then query, so pre-canned results, and then API feeds so that people can start attaching farm applications or other systems. And this means that we can cover everything from the smallest landholder to the largest landholder, using the simplest data to the most complex data. As some quick examples of the outputs I'll show here, just to show that it is actually an operational system. These are some really great examples from Australia that I've decided to pull up here. These are for the Australian carbon market, and this is FLINTpro running using a mix of models and remote sensing data of forest cover to allow individual carbon market participants to look at their large projects and determine what's the baseline emissions and what's the opportunity into the future should I start looking at tree planting, for example, in these areas. And what you can see here is some analyses of what those potentials actually are using that combination of systems. This is an example of the API feed. So farmers want something simple. They want something they can do in minutes. To enter the carbon market was very, very tough. They needed to use complex modelling systems provided by the government that could take anywhere between 1 to 3 days to do an estimate for their systems. So working with another company who developed a beautiful interface, we developed an API system into this that meant that farmers could very simply come in, draw their paddocks, as they have in this example, into the file. It would come back within 15 seconds and tell them what their carbon potential is and give them potential access to the carbon market. And finally, moving towards farm benchmarking, scope 1, 2, 3 emissions profiles. How do we actually start thinking about this so that we can again feed, using the APIs, this type of information backwards and forwards between farms, but also within financial organisations and with large agribusiness. So there's a huge amount of work going on in this space at the moment that I'm happy to talk to anyone else about in the future. A very quick summary. 3 key points. Firstly, the reporting needs are increasing. I think that's very, very obvious. They're increasing in coverage, complexity and frequency. As I think I pointed out, hopefully there is no silver bullet to this solution. We have to actually use all of the data, and that the key to this problem is going to be integration allowing for collaboration. So with that, I'm going to finish my presentation. Thank you very, very much for your time. If you are interested, please just reach out, and I would very much look forward to speaking to you in the future. Have a great time. Cheers.